On August 23, 1912, a family was on a camping and fishing trip at Swayze Lake in Louisiana, United States. This is when their son came up missing, which started a nationwide search that lasted 8 months. A boy that matched the description was later found with a traveling handyman, but he claims the boy with him was the illegitimate child of a woman that entrusted the boy to him. This started one of the most famous missing person cases in U.S. history, full of mystery, mistaken identity, with an incredible twist revealed decades later. I urge you to stay until the end for a seriously shocking twist of the story. Did they have the right boy? Join me as we delve into this mystery and attempt to dig up the truth of what really happened. And welcome to Dredge Reality, where we talk about crazy facts, mysteries, and scary stories we've dredged from reality. Please subscribe to our channel, hit the bell notification, and the like button so you don't miss any content we've dredged up for you. Now let's get to digging. On the morning of August 23, 1912, in Opelousas, Louisiana, in Landry Parish, a man named Percy Dunbar, his wife Leslie Dunbar, their 1-year-old son Alonzo, and their 4-year-old son named Bobby left their home and headed to Swayze Lake, also in Landry Parish, Louisiana, for a camping and fishing trip. The Dunbars had access to a cabin at the lake and would frequently take trips. The lake was only about a 35-minute drive from their home, so it wasn't too long of a drive for them. Swayze Lake is a remote and swampy area surrounded by dense forests, popular for outdoor recreation at the time. It doesn't seem to be as popular of a place nowadays because I'm having a hard time finding information about it online. If you have any modern-day information on the lake, please let me know in the comments. Percy was a local real estate and insurance agent in Opelousas, and Leslie was a homemaker working hard raising her children, Alonzo and Bobby, and taking care of the household. They both worked very hard and were always busy, so they wanted to take a trip as a getaway to escape their daily routine. Even though in Louisiana the summers get extremely hot and humid, such trips were a common pastime for most middle-class families during that era, offering a chance to relax, fish, and enjoy the outdoors. The Dunbars likely viewed the trip as not only an opportunity to enjoy the great outdoors, but an opportunity to spend time together. With their schedules being so busy, they didn't spend quality time together, and their sons were growing up so fast. The Dunbars also invited several friends and family members on their trip. It's not well documented who exactly, but we do know that there were some friends and family there. As soon as the family arrived, they set up camp and started enjoying the day fishing. It's important to lay out the landscape of the lake. The lake was very remote, surrounded by dense forest and swampy terrain. Even though the lake is known for its abundant fish and wildlife, it also has its inherent dangers, including alligators. So really not the best place for a 4-year-old to be wandering around. The family spent the rest of the morning fishing, relaxing, conversing, and just enjoying the outdoor setting. Reports suggest the family was focused on fishing and other outdoor activities while keeping a casual eye on the children. Percy and Leslie's son, 4-year-old Bobby, had been playing near the campsite and along the lake's edge. Sometime around noon or early afternoon, shortly after seeing Bobby playing by the lake's edge, they noticed he was gone. The Dunbars, their family, and their friends began frantically searching the campsite and surrounding areas of Swayze Lake. They called out to Bobby, hoping he had wandered nearby and would respond. Concerned that Bobby might have fallen into the lake, they also inspected the water's edge. By this point, absolute panic ensued. Bobby was only 4 years old and they just saw him a few minutes earlier. They kept searching and screaming his name, but to no avail. They then decided it was time to get some additional help. When they couldn't find Bobby, the Dunbars sought help from others camping or living near the lake. Word spread quickly, and local residents joined in on the search. After they exhausted these efforts, the Dunbars ended up calling authorities and reporting their son missing. After local authorities were contacted and the search expanded with the help of law enforcement, bloodhounds were brought in to track Bobby's scent, but the dogs were unable to lead searchers to him. Volunteers also scoured the dense woods, swampy areas, and shallow parts of the lake. As darkness fell, the search continued with lanterns and torches. No sign of Bobby was found, and the family spent a sleepless night fearing the worst. On the second day that little 4-year-old Bobby was missing, which was August 24th, 1912, the community rallied to assist the Dunbars, and more people from all over the community joined the search, coming together to help this family in their distress. The worst was feared at this point. Not many 4-year-olds can survive in situations like this, especially with the water and alligators nearby. Investigators assumed they were looking for a body at this point. Investigators brought out divers to search for Bobby, but they didn't find any remains of the young boy. Investigators and locals also killed several alligators, cutting them open to see if the boy was inside. But yet again, investigators found nothing. It was time to look a little deeper. As the search continued, dynamite was detonated in the lake to churn up anything in the water. Dynamite was a common practice at the time for recovering bodies believed to be submerged, as the explosion could dislodge them from underwater obstructions and bring them to the surface. These efforts didn't reveal young Bobby. This is when investigators started dragging the waters with a dredge, hoping to uncover the truth of what really happened, just like we do here on the channel. Despite these efforts, no trace of Bobby was discovered, no footprints or clothing, deepening the mystery. The search for Bobby continued for weeks, gaining statewide attention. Rumors and theories spread, including him being eaten by an alligator and the possibility of abduction, but no concrete evidence ever emerged. The case became one of the most widely reported missing children cases of the time. It's reported that Percy and Leslie Dunbar physically stayed at the lake for days after Bobby's disappearance, desperate to find their son. The search continued for weeks, with the couple staying in the Swayze Lake area at the forefront, coordinating search with locals and authorities hoping for any sign of Bobby. The community's involvement and the couple's persistence kept the search going for all these weeks, even as hope faded. When no trace of Bobby was found after weeks of searching, Percy and Leslie reluctantly returned to their home in Opelousas, Louisiana, where they continued advocating for information about their missing son. Their decision to leave the lake was difficult. Imagine your child missing, and after weeks of looking and not knowing where they are, you have to leave the area. This was absolutely devastating for Percy and Leslie. Gone, without a trace, on a normal day out having fun with the family, any parent's worst nightmare. Despite all this, the couple still held on to hope that Bobby might still be alive somewhere out there. What could have possibly happened to little Bobby Dunbar? After the initial search for Bobby, and with no evidence of drowning or an animal attack, the authorities began to suspect that Bobby had been abducted. The case shifted from a local search effort to a broader investigation over the following months. Bobby's disappearance garnered significant media attention, spreading awareness across Louisiana and neighboring states. The Dunbar family, devastated by the loss, offered a reward of $6,000 for any information that could lead them to Bobby, and they continued to work closely with law enforcement. $6,000 was no joke in 1912. That was equivalent to almost $200,000 in 2024. But for the Dunbars, money wasn't an option. They desperately wanted to find their baby boy they loved dearly. The Dunbars enlisted the help of private detectives and law enforcement agencies to investigate potential sightings and abduction leads. They passed out posters and alerts with descriptions of Bobby. They even worked with newspapers to spread the news far and wide. This, along with attention being brought to the $6,000 reward, generated significant public interest. Tips started pouring in. Investigators chased numerous reports of boys matching Bobby's description across Louisiana and neighboring states, though most turned out to be dead ends. Even though their substantial reward led to increased community involvement, it also caused false leads, as some people were motivated by money rather than genuine information. This pattern went on for months, with Percy and Leslie Dunbar losing confidence Bobby would ever be found. Every lead that led to a dead end was a little more hope lost. That was until 8 months later, in April of 1913, when authorities received a promising lead of the whereabouts of Bobby. On April 3, 1913, an unknown resident of Hub, Mississippi, contacted authorities in Louisiana claiming to see a small boy that looked just like Bobby, with a traveling handyman named William Cantwell Walters. William was around 50 years old, born in 1862 in Pineville, Louisiana. He was an itinerant handyman and tinker who led a nomadic lifestyle, traveling around the southern United States. His profession involved offering his services as a repairman, fixing household items like umbrellas, tools, and other small goods. William was known for his mobility, often moving from one town to another and not being tied to a specific place of residence. He was described as a solitary man, often working alone and interacting with locals in small communities he visited. William had lived a somewhat obscure and low-profile life. He had been married, but there are few details about his family life or personal relationships. His profession as a handyman required him to travel frequently, and he would often be in rural areas where his services were in demand. Walters was reportedly known for being helpful, but somewhat elusive, with the reputation of being a loner. In April of 2013, William was traveling with a boy he claimed to be Bruce Anderson, the son of a woman named Julia Anderson, who had allegedly entrusted him with the child's care. However, locals in Hub, Mississippi became suspicious of William and reported him to authorities on April 3, 1913, as the boy he was traveling with looked very close to the missing Bobby Dunbar. On April 4, 1914, William was detained in Columbia, Mississippi by local law enforcement officers in the area. They detained him and the boy, believing the child might be Bobby Dunbar. William was questioned and maintained that the boy was Bruce Anderson, the son of a woman named Julia Anderson, who had entrusted him with the child's care. Despite William's protest, the authorities proceeded with an arrest and the boy was taken into custody. William's story about the child being Bruce Anderson was contested, and the police began to suspect that the boy might actually be Bobby Dunbar. Authorities did check with Julia Anderson at some point, and she confirmed the boy with William was her son Bruce, but authorities didn't look any deeper and didn't believe her story. They didn't believe a mother wouldn't report her son missing. Percy and Leslie Dunbar were notified about the arrest and the boy's possible resemblance to Bobby. The Dunbars were eager but apprehensive about the possibility that the boy was their son. They traveled to Mississippi to identify the child. Upon arriving in Columbia, they were brought to see the child, who was being held by local authorities. The moment was filled with intense emotion, as the Dunbars had spent nearly 9 months searching for Bobby, and now they were confronted with the possibility that he had been found. It's disputed on what actually happened when the Dunbars arrived. One account claims that the boy woke up and cried "Mother," causing Leslie to faint. Another account claims the boy woke up as Leslie stood over him and started to cry. Leslie apparently gasped and said, "I don't know, I'm not quite sure." The newspapers also disagreed on exactly what happened in the interaction and if the boy recognized the Dunbars as his family. The emotional toll of the identification process was immense, as the Dunbars had lived through the trauma of Bobby's disappearance and were uncertain about the boy's true identity at first. Percy Dunbar was initially unsure, stating that the boy's eyes were smaller than Bobby's, but he later convinced himself that the boy was indeed his son. Leslie Dunbar, Bobby's mother, was more confident in her identification, as she believed that the boy resembled Bobby, recognizing some familiar moles and scars despite some physical differences. Although there was initial hesitation and uncertainty, the child was eventually identified by the Dunbars as Bobby Dunbar. The judge in the case agreed, and the boy was given back to the parents, and they headed back to Opelousas, Louisiana. But in the back of their minds, they truly had their doubts. When the family was returned to their home in Opelousas, Louisiana, the boy was greeted as a returning hero, with parades and public celebrations held in his honor. Newspapers widely reported the event, portraying it as a happy ending to a tragic story. But not everyone was convinced that this boy was Bobby Dunbar. Many people in the community thought it was odd Bobby had only been missing for 8 months, and the Dunbars didn't instantly recognize him and could only identify him through moles and scars. Reports indicate that the boy initially seemed confused and unsure about his surroundings. Friends and relatives noticed that the child did not immediately recognize familiar people or places, which raised more doubts about whether he truly was Bobby. These doubts were overshadowed by the community and the media's support of the Dunbars. Over time, the boy adjusted to life with the Dunbars, and many interpreted his initial confusion as a result of trauma or being away for months. When a newspaper named the New Orleans Item caught wind of Julia Anderson claiming the boy claimed as Bobby Dunbar was really her son Bruce, they paid for her to travel to Louisiana and see if she could identify the boy as her son. She traveled to Opelousas on May 1st, 1913. Julia Anderson is the same woman William Cantwell Walters had told authorities and trusted him with her son Bruce. The authorities obviously didn't believe William or Julia at the time, but now here she is, flesh and blood, right in front of authorities claiming the recently found Bobby Dunbar is actually her son Bruce Anderson. A little background on Julia Anderson. She was a poor, unmarried woman living in Mississippi. She was born in 1886, so this made her 27 in 1913. Julia grew up in Mississippi in the late 19th century. Not much else is known about her earlier life. Around 1909 to 1910, the exact date is unknown, Julia had a son named Bruce Anderson. Bruce's father was reportedly a man named Zedric Long, but records vary on his actual name. The relationship between Julia and Zedric was likely brief, and Bruce was born out of wedlock, which carried significant social stigma at the time. Julia Anderson raised Bruce as a single mother, which was uncommon and difficult for an unmarried woman in the early 20th century. Julia was a struggling single mother. She was living near her parents. It was common for unmarried women with children to reside with their families for support during the early 20th century. Julia's parents had a professional relationship with William Cantwell Walters, often staying in the area while working on repair jobs. This is when Julia came to know William during these visits to her parents and considered him a trustworthy acquaintance. This is when William claimed that Julia, struggling financially as a single mother, allegedly had voluntarily given him temporary custody of her son Bruce to help care for the child. Julia later disputed this, maintaining that she never intended for Bruce to be taken permanently. William consistently maintained during his arrest and trial that Julia Anderson had willingly entrusted Bruce to his care over a year earlier in 1912. Julia claimed that her agreement was only for a brief period and that she was not consulted or informed when William left the area with Bruce. She insisted that William had left with Bruce without her full understanding or consent, and that she had not known where they were for an extended period. The details on exactly what happened with Julia entrusting William with her son Bruce are really unclear, but we do know at some point William took Bruce because of Julia's financial struggles, but there is a lot of gray area and the agreement of what happened is up for debate. After William was arrested, newspapers reported on the kidnapping arrest. As soon as news spread to Julia, that's when she realized William had traveled farther away with her son than expected. Julia did not initially report Bruce missing because she believed that William would have returned her son as promised. As soon as Julia heard the news of William's arrest and her son being taken by the Dunbars, this is when on Thursday, May 1st, 1913, the New Orleans Item paid for her to travel to Opelousas, Louisiana to tell authorities about the situation. Even though William had stressed this to the police, they didn't believe him or Julia. The police really made a lot of assumptions and jumped the gun in this situation without doing a thorough investigation. She explained that William had taken Bruce with her permission temporarily, but did not return the boy to her. Julia provided details about her son, including his appearance and mannerisms, to support her claim. The boy claimed as Bobby and 4 other boys of the same age were brought in at one time to meet Julia, but she didn't recognize any of them, and none of the boys recognized her. Julia then asked for a second meeting the next day and declared the boy in question was her son Bruce after undressing him and recognizing some moles. This hesitation was likely due to the time that had passed since she had last saw him. It had been over a year, the boy's possible changes in appearance, and the immense pressure and scrutiny she faced. Julia spent additional time with the boy in a private setting, and after observing his behavior, mannerisms, and physical traits, she became confident that this was her son Bruce. After Julia came forward to authorities claiming that the boy found with William was her son Bruce Anderson, the case became a legal and emotional battle between her and the Dunbar family, who insisted the boy was their son, Bobby Dunbar. I mean, imagine getting who you think is your son back after he was missing for months, only to have a lady show up and say it was her missing son. But in turn, imagine Julia's position as well, seeing who she thought was her son being taken by another family. But who was right in the situation here? Did the Dunbars really find their son? Or were they blinded by the joy and the thought of finding their child? Is this really Julia's kid that she left in the care of William? Was she really telling the truth? Was she mistaken and it was the wrong kid? It is a little odd she went over a year without contact and didn't report him missing sooner, but she could have truly believed that William was returning with Bruce. After Julia Anderson made the claim that the boy was her son Bruce, the public opinion was against her. Not only did people think it was fishy she didn't report her son missing, they also claimed that she had loose morals. The New Orleans Item newspaper, the ones who paid for Julia to travel to Louisiana, even claimed that she was a prostitute and an unfit mother. Julia was a poor, single mother, and the Dunbars were a wealthier, respected family in the community. This made the authorities, media, and community especially biased in the case. The stigma behind being a poor single mother compared to being a respected upper-middle-class family made a huge difference in public opinion. The newspaper played on societal biases to paint her as unworthy of reclaiming her son. The insinuation that Julia was immoral further undermined her credibility in the eyes of the court and the public. Needless to say, authorities in the court didn't believe the boy was Julia's son Bruce. They let him stay with the Dunbars and believed he was Bobby Dunbar. Julia returned home alone, claiming the boy was her son the entire time. William Cantwell Walters ended up going to court for the kidnapping of Bobby Dunbar in Louisiana. He was convicted for the kidnapping in 1914. He was sentenced to serve life in prison. Even despite people in Mississippi swearing that he had been traveling with the boy long before Bobby Dunbar disappeared, William also stuck with the story of the boy being entrusted to him. William's lawyers successfully appealed to the Louisiana Supreme Court, citing legal irregularities during the trial, and won a new trial on appeal. But because it was so expensive to have another trial, authorities didn't go this route, so they released him from prison after serving almost 2 years. Wow, what a lucky bastard. In 1915, William returned to his work as a tinker and handyman, traveling from town to town, but his reputation was tarnished, and he lived under the shadow of these accusations for the rest of his life. He reportedly expressed bitterness about how he had been treated and about losing Bruce, whom he had maintained was not Bobby Dunbar. This pretty much ruined William's life. He had a hard time finding work and no one trusted him. William Cantwell Walters passed away in April of 1945 in Pueblo, Colorado. He lived the remainder of his life in relative obscurity, struggling with the stigma of the Bobby Dunbar case until his death. Julia Anderson returned to Mississippi after her failed attempt to retrieve Bruce from the Dunbars, continuing to live in poverty and working as a domestic laborer. Her life remained challenging as she had no financial means or support to take legal action again to fight for her son. Julia was devastated by losing her son and was unable to reclaim him despite her claims. The emotional toll of being denied custody of her child had a profound effect on her. Eventually, Julia moved to North Carolina where she married and started a new family. She had more children and tried to rebuild her life. Though she remarried and had more children, Julia never stopped asserting that the boy taken by the Dunbars was her son Bruce. She lived the rest of her life with the pain of losing him and the trauma from those events. Julia passed away on February 1st, 1940. After Bobby Dunbar was returned to his family in 1913, he lived the rest of his life largely unaware of the controversy surrounding his identity. His life after being reunited with his family was marked by normal childhood development, but the events of his early years had a lasting impact on him, even though he had never fully understood the situation. Bobby grew up with his parents and his younger brother Alonzo. The Dunbars continued their lives in Louisiana, and Bobby was raised in a relatively normal upper-middle-class environment, despite the trauma and confusion of his early years. Bobby was unaware of the legal battle and the controversy regarding his identity. The Dunbars never told him the full story of how he came to be with them, and the boy raised as Bobby grew up believing he was indeed a Dunbar child. Bobby Dunbar married Marjorie Byers. They had several children together. He lived a relatively quiet life as an adult, working as a salesman for the Briggs Electric Supply Company. He lived in Louisiana, where he was well liked and respected. He lived as any other average middle-class man of his time. He passed away on March 8, 1966. This is where the truth is revealed. Over the years, researchers, journalists, and even members of the Dunbar and Anderson families began to question the true identity of the boy raised as Bobby Dunbar. The case had remained unsolved for decades, and interest in the Bobby Dunbar case resurfaced in the 1990s, prompting a closer examination of the facts. In the 1990s and the early 2000s, media reports and genealogical researchers began looking into the case more seriously. It was during this time that the family members of both the Dunbars and the Andersons started to take an interest in finding the definitive proof of the boy's true identity. Starting in the early 1990s, Margaret Dunbar Cutright and Linda Traver, the respected granddaughters of Bobby Dunbar and Julia Anderson, were who was pushing this case into the public's eye again. They set out to solve the Bobby Dunbar mystery once and for all. After much investigating over more than a decade, Margaret finally convinced her father, Robert Dunbar Jr., to submit to a DNA test in 2004. The DNA test confirmed that the boy raised as Bobby Dunbar was in fact Bruce Anderson, the missing child of Julia Anderson. This means that Julia was telling the truth the whole time. The wrong family had raised Bobby all along. This means that William Cantwell Walters was sent to prison for years and was painted as a kidnapper his entire life. But then again, Julia does claim that he wasn't supposed to leave with Bruce like he did, so technically he was a kidnapper, just not of Bobby. Julia spent her whole life knowing that her son was really hers but claimed as another boy by the Dunbars. This must have been one of the most painful things to go through. The Dunbars raised this boy as their own, but I wonder what happened to the real Bobby Dunbar. Of course, we can only speculate at this point. Julia Anderson, William Cantwell Walters, Percy and Leslie Dunbar, and Bruce Anderson, raised as Bobby Dunbar, never found out about this information, as they had all passed by the time the truth came out. Maybe it's for the best they didn't find out later in life. Maybe it's an ignorance is bliss kind of thing. But I truly feel for Julia Anderson living her entire life knowing her son was taken by another family and assumed a new identity. A truly heartbreaking situation. What do you think happened to the real Bobby Dunbar? Do you think it was a kidnapping, maybe a drowning, or even possibly eaten by an alligator? Leave a comment below and let me know what you think. Thanks so much for watching, and please make sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any reality we've dredged up for you. I'll see you next time with some more crazy facts, mysteries, and scary stories we've dredged from reality.